Hey guys, sorry I sound like Batman today. I was a little under the weather while we were in New Orleans. I swear it wasn't New Orleans that caused this. We actually just got back from the World Golf Fitness Summit. Very cool experience. Excited to bring the knowledge and some of the techniques and skills that we learned there back into the clinic here at the farm. Had one of our athlete ambassadors, our power lifter, send us an article this morning, and it kind of just piqued my interest. And Sloan's going to show this article. This is from Starting Strength. Pretty good website here. Usually puts out decent material. The article is hiding behind smoke screens. So we had the opportunity to listen to Greg Cook speak. I've listened to a lot of his stuff, never in person, so it's cool to get to hear him in person, shake his hand. But one of the things that he was actually talking about, which he talks about a lot, is that a movement screen is not predicting injury, which is what everybody always questions. We saw another talk from Garrett Kramer, a psychologist at large, but sports psychologist, and his talk was on just kind of mental clarity and how it affects your overall influence on the people around you and how they influence you. And all the questions were about meditation. And it kind of became this joke, like that wasn't even what his talk was about. I feel like that's what we get out here sometimes, is the movement screen is not an injury predictor, and everybody wants to act like it's trying to be, and that's not the case. So there's some points about this article. If you want to read this, again, Starting Strength, Hiding Behind Smoke Screens, I encourage you to read it. I posted it on my Facebook page as well, so you can go on there, maybe comment. First thing I want to talk about is what we just said. The screen is not there to predict injury. It's there to look for bottlenecks in movement. Now, is there a correlation between, I don't even know if we should call it movement dysfunction, but movements that aren't quite right and possible future injury? Yes. But the bigger picture is the people that score lower on a movement screen, doesn't even matter if you're doing the FMS, just a screen in general, that score lower when an injury does happen, which it will, are going to have a longer time frame to get back to normal play or normal activity. So the movement screen, working on those movements that aren't quite where we want them, creates a buffer around our sport or activity that allows for the possibility of reduced injuries, but it's also how we handle those injuries when we come from a movement standpoint. I hope everybody understands that, and I know it can be debated to the nth degree. At the end of the day, it's what a screen is meant to do and how you're using it, and implementation is where all the magic is. Next thing that they talk about in this, maybe I may go down, or actually in the article, it talks about the hybrid of therapists and strength conditioning coaches or personal trainers. I'm a strength and conditioning coach. I'm also a chiropractor, so I feel like I meld the two together very well. My last bullet point here, the actual issue, we're going to talk about that a little more, so I don't want to bring that up yet. But they talk a lot about anthropomorphic differences. So anthropometric, wow, I should learn how to say that word if I'm going to talk about it right. What that basically means is measuring different parts of the body, and then how the measurements of those parts of the body dictate movement. So obviously anybody that's done any lifting, is in the powerlifting world, whatever it is, you realize that everybody does move different, and that's going to be based on, a really common one is femur length in the squat, deadlifts like that. And basically what they're getting at in this article is that if we're not taking into account the differences in people's body shapes and types and lengths of bones and all those things, and we try to fit everybody into a cookie cutter scenario for a particular movement, let's just take a deadlift for example, then we're going to run into issues, and that we can train people to do a movement that they can't do. But if you go back to a principle of, and I'm using the FMS because I use the FMS in the office, a principle of the FMS, or really anything, whether it's TPI, just smart, basically movement therapy, is we can't make somebody do something they can't do. How do you find that out? You screen them. So I can't force somebody to do a high bar back squat and get down and look like the same person next to him that may have a different setup of torso to lower extremity ratio or a longer femur. It's just not going to look the same. We can get the same movement done, but you do have to coach those individual people. On that same note, they don't mention names, they bring up FMS in the article, they bring up the joint by joint approach theory. versus teaching whole body movement. And they basically say they have had success with teaching whole body movements, deadlifts, squats, everything in one day with no injury, and the people are fine. But they're setting themselves up for a fail by saying it's just one day. We should have the long-term picture in mind when we're working with people. But basically they say that we get very myopic from a therapy standpoint of talking about specific joints and making sure that we have adequate dorsiflexion to do something like a deadlift. And they specifically say in the article, you do not need 30 degrees of dorsiflexion to perform deadlift, which I agree with. Everybody else would. The point that they're missing is if I can't adequately move through my ankle or anywhere else in my body, I have to rob from someplace else to accomplish that movement. So what we're trying to do by working on corrective exercise, coaching a technique that is specific to that person, is create buffers around that movement so they're not tapping into the end range of muscles, tendons, ligaments, joints. That's where injury occurs in specific movements. And that brings me to another point. They talk about maybe there's a little bit of scare tactic or fear mongering associated with therapists basically trying to pull people away from movements while they have these movement dysfunctions. So let's say I can't move through my ankle adequately or I can't touch my toes. And a lot of doctors, Gray Cook said it, maybe you shouldn't be picking up heavy things off the ground if you can't touch your toes. Pretty smart, but they are kind of not agreeing with that in here. And basically the point that they extrapolate that to is you can't correlate an injury from a specific movement. I kind of agree, but at the same time, we're not always saying, hey, Joey went into the gym, he did a 350-pound deadlift, and that's what blew his back out. Anybody that's in manual medicine or conservative management of injuries understands that it wasn't that one move, it was the 1,000 moves before with that same motion, irregardless of a deadlift. How you pick a sock up, how we pick something up off the ground, how I go to sit in a chair, that add up. Now what makes me move a particular way throughout the day is the function of my body from head to toe. So if I can't move through my ankle and I'm walking and I lose hip extension, and then here we get the dreaded glute inhibition, that's going to affect how I deadlift. So you better believe that your ankle does affect your deadlift, whether you say it's necessary for the movement or not. So that's that whole injury causation versus correlation. To say cause, it has to happen every time. So if I deadlift 100 times and I get hurt 99, but I don't once, it's not causative, it's correlative. Okay? And I think the whole actual issue with this article, which is actually a good point. So I think the article is getting ripped to shreds, which it kind of needs to be in my opinion. The big point here is that we may have practitioners, I don't care if you're a chiropractor that's using strength conditioning or you're a strength conditioning coach that's dabbling a bit in the therapeutic side of things, is if you don't have a good working knowledge of the territory that you're going into, you're probably going to mess some things up. So if I have a therapist out there that is coaching a deadlift that maybe has the big pieces but doesn't know the fine nuances, you're going to run into a problem. Same thing, let's say I'm a strength conditioning coach that's trying to apply soft tissue to one of my athletes, and I don't understand really what I'm doing. I don't know the core principles, and I'm just applying or mimicking something I've seen. Probably going to run into issues. So basically the core root issue of this is you have to have a good working knowledge and understanding of the subject that you're trying to convey to your client or your patient. And that is common sense, I hope, for most of us. So the article hits that nail on the head, whether they say that's the issue or not. I just wanted to point that out because it brings up a lot of good points. It's good to have discussions about this. I posted it on my Facebook page. If you guys want to comment on there, comment on the video. Love to hear your feedback, and we can have a good educated discussion about this. Get a hold of us on our website or email me at drbeaubeard@gmail.com.